Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Luca. Thank you very much for your opening remarks, Minister Reyers. It's fantastic to be here in Riga on behalf of EBRD discussing reforms and investments. I want to first use this opportunity to thank Latvia for being the host country for this event. We are very impressed by the progress with the legislation on covered bonds. The attention the conference today has won shows the significance and the possibilities for the creation of a covered bond market across the Baltic states. I would also like to thank the Vice President of the European Commission, Valdis Dombrovskis, for delivering the keynote speech yesterday evening, the Ministers of Finance for joining us here today, the European Mortgage Federation, the many distinguished panelists, and of course all of you for joining us here for our discussion. For the EBRD, covered bonds are an increasingly important work stream, bringing policy and investment hand in hand. They merge what is very important to us as a development bank, policy engagement and reform, together with real investment in order to attract more investment to the region. To date, we have invested some 628 million euros in covered bonds across our regions, mainly through our participation in issuances alongside private investors. This is what we are focusing on in the Baltics. We are working with the local authorities not only to increase the supply side, but also the demand side, with a focus on increasing attractiveness for international investors. Today we have gathered to discuss the next steps for the Pan-Baltic covered bond legal and regulatory framework, a concept we are very proud of, not only because of its potential, but because the EBRD was involved from the very beginning. We thank the European Commission's Structural Reform Support Service for their financial support to this project. When we first began our work on covered bond and securitization legal frameworks in 2016, we quickly encountered the question, how can we get an investable volume to create a market? So we came up with the idea to develop a joint covered bonds and capital markets union for the Baltics. This essentially kick-started the idea of the Pan-Baltic capital market. Fast forward to November 2017, when a memorandum of understanding was signed in Brussels by all the Baltic ministers. The purpose was simple, to create a Pan-Baltic capital market in order to strengthen the respective economies and stimulate investment to create jobs, all in line with the European Commission's Capital Markets Union Action Plan and EBRD's priorities in the region. Covered bonds are, in fact, a big part of the CMU. And of course, with the EU framework on covered bonds having been adopted a few days ago, we feel like we're making real progress on this. The Pan-Baltics Capital Markets Union MOU was immediately welcomed by the market with significant investments. This included the successful IPO of the Port of Tallinn, the secondary public offer of Auga Group, and debut bond issues by Luminor Bank and Maxima Group. We participated in all of these, I'm happy to say. We're now looking forward to the first covered bonds in the Baltics. We are positive that covered bonds will open up long-term funding options for banks in the Baltics, allowing them to increase lending to the regional economies. This, in turn, will strengthen the local financial institutions and therefore fortify them and the region against external shocks. We've made good progress on our goals. On the Pan-Baltic Covered Bond Project, our public consultation has ended on April 3rd, and we thank you all for your comments. We are reviewing them and hope to finalize this project this year. In Estonia, the law was adopted in February, which is a milestone, and we look forward to first issuances. We are also working with the ministry on incorporating the Pan-Baltic aspect to the Estonian legislation. In Lithuania, the covered bond and securitization law is to be submitted to the Parliament in the summer or early fall. And in Latvia, the concept paper was finalized in February, and we already have a good first draft of the law in our inboxes to work on. This all would not happen without the commitment of the ministries, our consultants Richard Kemish and Sorainen Law Offices, and the EBRD team, who I would like to thank very much for all of that. Coming back to our covered bond world, besides the Baltic states, today we have completed legal and regulatory reform work in Poland, Romania, and the Slovak Republic, while preparatory work continues in Croatia. The Slovak Republic is a really great example. Following legal and regulatory reform led by EBRD, we managed to have a AAA bond issued by our partner bank, Slovenska Sporitelna. This was a first in one of our countries of operation, and we invest in no less than 38 economies. Also, quite recently, we looked at the euro-based benchmark in the country. A 500 million bond issued by a Slovak bank was 4.8 times oversubscribed. It clearly shows that there's a strong appetite from international investors. So for the Baltic states, this signals if the legal framework is good and there is an attractive yield, then the investors will come. Our distinguished panelists will discuss the specifics of the published interim report and the next steps for the Pan-Baltic framework for covered bonds. Even with the covered bonds law being adopted in Estonia and the significant progress we've seen in Latvia and Lithuania, there is definitely more work to be done. So in finishing, I would just repeat a comment that I've heard in Riga, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So let's do it together. Thank you very much.